Welcome to this edition of the Drillnomics video tutorial series. Today I'm going to walk through step-by-step how to create a producing property model project in Drillnomics. I'm going to start by logging in. Once I'm logged into Drillnomics, I'll see all my projects in my account listed on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to add a new project, and I'll title this Producing Property Example. And save changes. Once Drillnomics creates the new project, it'll automatically add it to the end of my project list, and it will also bring it up in the main screen of Drillnomics. So we'll start with the Overview tab, and initially you can enter basic information about your project, seller information, property information, and a summary if you would like. This information will be brought into the Report Generator feature at the end of this project. However, it does not directly affect any of the calculations that Drillnomics performs. So if you would like to enter this information at a later date, you can. Next, I'm going to select the Producing Property Model. The acquisition that I'm evaluating today has existing production, and I would like to evaluate those wells on an individual basis. The Producing Property Model project allows for me to do this. In Drillnomics, the effective revenue start date is going to default to the current month and year. However, if your project has an effective date that's different than that, you can select this box and change it to whatever date fits your project in the past or in the future. Because I think there's potential for additional development in the future for this project, I'm going to select this box that allows me to create a type curve for PUDs, or Proven Undeveloped Reserves. This will allow me to model wells that will be drilled in the future and include them in the economics for this project. Next, I'm going to click on the Select Files button, and I'm going to choose a file that I've exported from IHS and saved in my computer. This production file contains production data for the 2 wells that are included in this project. If you need additional information on how to obtain these production files, please visit the Drillnomics website and you'll find additional video tutorials there. Once I select this file, Drillnomics will upload and normalize the data into my project. At this point, the Production Analysis tab becomes active. I'm going to go ahead and select that. You can view all the wells that you've uploaded to your project by using this drop-down. For this project, I uploaded production data for 2 wells and also included a PUD well. So starting with the first well on the list, I'm going to go ahead and set my oil and gas production forecasts. This first box gives you general information about your well, including your well name, the date of first production, which is brought in from the file that you imported, and the effective revenue start date that was set in the Overview tab. If you need to change this date, you can do so here. Drillnomics gives you the ability to view your data starting with the first month of production or starting with the peak month of production. I'm going to select the peak month production for this project. Moving on to the oil forecast, this first box in the oil forecast window allows you to change your view for your chart. So if you want to see more time or less time on the x-axis, you can adjust that using these selections. The second box contains all the hyperbolic variables that are going to set your production forecast. These can be changed to whatever values you would like in order to make your forecast fit your actual production data. Lastly, your total recoverable oil, or your EUR, is going to be shown here based on the forecast that you set. So this chart is going to show both your actual production data as well as the forecast that's set. Now right now you can see that this forecast does not match the actual production very well. Looking at the production, the first year or so of data is kind of up and down and not very reliable. Starting here, the data gets to be a little bit more reliable. So I'm going to try to set my forecast to match this data going forward to try to get a more reliable forecast for my economics. And I'll do that by changing my hyperbolic variables here. I'm going to flatten out the curve a little bit. And then I'll hit calculate. And this will change your solid line, which is your forecast, And we can see that fits the data pretty well, so I'm happy with that. Next, I'm going to move to my gas forecast. The gas is set up the exact same way as the oil. Again, you can see that this forecast does not fit the actual data very well. So I'm going to come back to these variables and change those to create a forecast that better fits the data. And I think that looks pretty good. This blue bar here that's present both in the gas forecast and in the oil forecast, it simply marks the date of your effective revenue start date that you set. So if you were to change that date, you would see this blue bar move. So once you're happy with your forecast for one well, you can come back to this drop-down and select the next well in the list and do the exact same thing. I'm going to again select peak month production, and then I'm going to set my oil forecast. I think that fits the data well. So moving on to gas, I'll do the same thing again. There we go. So that sets the production for my two producing wells. Lastly, I'm going to select the PUD well from the dropdown. Drillnomics gives you the ability to upload a new production file for your PUD well if you would like. This allows you to bring in production data that best represents what you think the future development for this project will be. For example, if the current production in your project comes from vertical wells, but you think in the future production is going to come from horizontal wells, you can upload production data from horizontal wells in the area and model your PUD well based on that. For this project, I'm going to go ahead and use the exact same file. Once uploaded, everything will look very similar for your type curve well as it did for the individual wells that you set forecasts for previously. I can see here that I've uploaded 2 wells for consideration in my type curve. If I'd like to see more details on those wells, I can click this arrow and I will be able to see details for each well that's been uploaded. I again have the ability to select if I want to view my data starting with the first month of production or the peak month of production, and I'm going to select peak month again. Moving down to the oil forecast window, you'll see in the chart that there are gray production lines here in addition to the green. The gray production lines are just the individual wells production that are being considered in your type curve, and the green line is the mathematical average of all the wells considered in the type curve. And again, the solid line is going to be the forecast that is set. So I'm going to go change my variables and set my forecast just as I did previously. And I'll do the same thing for the gas. Once I'm happy with my forecasts for my type curve well, I have completed the production analysis tab, and the financial analysis tab will now be active. I'm going to select that. And once the financial analysis tab opens, you again have a drop-down that will show you every well that's being considered in this project. So we have the 2 individual wells and also the PUD or type curve well. So I'll start by selecting the first well in the drop-down list. And this is where I'm going to enter all of my financial parameters in order to run my economics. Starting with the first section, I'm going to enter my shrink and my yield values. as well as my BTU content. And since I've accounted for the yield and the shrink of the gas, I'm going to leave my gas BTU content at 1. And I'll select Update. Drillnomics will then calculate a production table where you can see on a yearly basis your oil production, gas production, and NGL production. This table is expandable, so if you want to see more detail than just the year, you can select the plus sign and you'll get a monthly breakdown of your production. Every table in Drillnomics works this way, and you can do this with any year you would like. Moving on, I'm going to enter a net revenue interest for this project of 80%. And Drillnomics will calculate a net production table. The next section is going to be my pricing. I can either use a strip table pricing and enter prices for the first 5 years, or I can use flat pricing. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and enter flat prices. I'll then enter my oil, gas, and NGL differentials. We'll say we have an oil differential of $8 per barrel, 50 cents per MCF on the gas, and generally NGL differentials are built into the NGL price, so I'll set that at 0. Drillnomics gives you the option to increase your price on a % per year basis if you would like. I'm going to go ahead and increase the prices at 2% per year moving forward. And selecting Update, Drillnomics will then generate a price table for me. This price table is important when you're looking at PUD wells and drilling wells in the future. You want to make sure that if you're going to drill a well 5 years out, that these prices seem reasonable. The prices in this table are including the differentials, so it will be the price that you set minus whatever you set your differential at. Drillnomics will then calculate your production revenue for you. And the last section is your working interest and all of your LOE costs. So we'll say that this lease has 100% working interest. Since it's primarily oil wells, we'll say there's an $8 per barrel LOE, as well as a $3,000 per month flat LOE for these wells. You can change your LOE year over year on a % per year basis. So I'm going to assume that we are going to operate these wells more efficiently over time, and I'm actually going to reduce my LOE by 2% per year. Because this is a producing well, there is not going to be an initial CapEx cost. I'm going to set the abandonment cost at $100,000 and assume a tax rate of 7%. Now you have generated your net operating revenue as well as your cash flow. The last thing in this section is to calculate your NPV tables. So by selecting Update, Drillnomics is going to calculate the NPV of this specific well at varying discount rates. So once you're happy with all your financial parameters for this well, you have a few options. You can either return to the top of the screen, select the next well in the dropdown, and enter all of the information again for that well. However, if you think that a lot of the data is going to be the same for each well, you can use this Apply Variables to All Wells button at the bottom. Before doing that, I'm going to select the Update All. Now, if you've selected Update for each section as you've gone through the financial analysis screen, then it will all be updated, but it's always safe to update all just to make sure that all the calculations are using the most recent data that you've input. So once I've done that, I'm going to say that for these wells, most of these variables are going to be the same. So I'm going to select the Apply Variables to All Wells button. Drillnomics will then give you a screen to make sure that this is what you want to do, because it will overwrite any other data that you've put into the Financial Analysis tab. So I do want to do that. So now, instead of having to go through each individual well in my project and put in the data over and over again, I've copied it all. I've copied all the data to all of the wells. In a project like this where I only have a few wells, it's not that big of a deal, but if you're bringing in many wells, this can save you a lot of time. Another option you have if you don't want to overwrite all the variables for all of the wells is you can go to an individual variable. For example, if I know the net revenue interest is going to be 80% for every well in this project, I can select this gray arrow button right here, and that will apply that individual variable to every well in the project. So by selecting that, I've told Drillnomics to make the net revenue interest 80% for every single well in the project. So those are two ways that you can save some time if you're going to be entering repetitive data. Before moving on, I do need to make one change to the PUD well. Because the data I initially entered was for producing wells, the initial CapEx was $0 because the wells have already been drilled. I then copied that data to every well in the project. However, because the PUD well will be drilled at some point in the future, it is going to have a CapEx associated with it. So I'll select the PUD well from the dropdown and scroll down to the net cash flow section. Everything will remain the same except I'll put in an initial CapEx value. And I'm going to assume that in the future I'll be able to drill these new wells for $5 million. So I'll enter $5 million for my initial CapEx and select Update. And then scroll to the very bottom and Update All just to be sure everything is current. Now here I see in the net present value table, for the previous wells, the net present value was always positive because there was no capital investment. However, now that we've entered a capital investment of $5 million, you can see that at these higher rates, the net present value becomes negative, as you would expect. The only other thing I'd like to note about these tables in this section is that for the wells that have an effective revenue start date, these tables are going to show you data from that point forward, not from when the well first began producing. So if a well began producing 5 years ago, but your effective revenue start date is the current date, this year one is going to be for the current year moving forward. Once all of your information is entered into this financial analysis tab and you're happy with your assumptions, we can move on to the build out model. So I'm going to select the build out model tab. And once it opens, you'll see a net present value table for each individual well in your project. I'm going to select a net present value for each well, and this will be based on your company's economic standards. But for these producing wells, I'm going to go ahead and select an NPV at 10% for both of the producing wells. Now you can see these gray arrows are present just like they were in the financial analysis tab. If you were to select that gray arrow, it would set every well in the project to have an NPV at 10%. It will force that value across all your wells. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave the PUD well as do not include for the time being, and I'll include the PUD well into the project as a build out well. So scrolling down, this box allows you to create build out wells for your project. So I'm going to use this drop down and select the PUD well because that's what I want my new well to be based off of. And I will select add new well. Here you can give your well whatever name you would like. We'll name it PUD 1. And you can change your start date. So if you think this well is going to be drilled 3 years in the future, you can go out to, we'll say, January of 2019 and select that as your date. You can also update your working interest and your NRI if you think those are going to change. I think they're going to stay the same, so I will hit calculate. And a new NPV table will be calculated. And from here, we can select a discount rate. I generally choose something higher for PUD wells because there's more uncertainty. So we'll say PV 15 for this well. From here, if you'd like to create another well, if you think there's going to be multiple wells drilled in the future, you can go through the exact same process by adding a new well, setting your date, and selecting your NPV value again. I'm just going to leave it at 1 for now. At the bottom of the Build Out Model tab, we have some cash flow charts. This first chart is a projected cash flow model showing your dollars per month on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. As you scroll through, a pop-out will appear and you can see how much of that cash flow is contributed by each well in the project. So initially we just have the 2 wells that are currently producing, and you can see in August of 2016, these are the values that can be expected from the 2 wells. And as we move forward, in January of 2019, you will see the initial capital investment in order to drill that PUD well that we included. And moving forward, the cash flows are going to increase significantly because the production from the PUD well has been included in the project moving forward. It's important to note that the cash flow values in this chart are undiscounted cash flows, not discounted. The second chart is very similar, except it's showing a cumulative cash flow over time instead of monthly cash flow. However, it's the same data, and initially you're going to have the 2 wells until that PUD well is brought on, and you'll see the capital investment in order to drill the PUD well, and then the cumulative cash flows going forward. The last tab in this project is going to be the Report Generator tab. Selecting that, Drillnomics is going to pull in all the information that you have input and uploaded into a report that you can then email to yourself as a PDF and save for later. So what we see, you'll remember that there was the optional information in the Overview tab that we did not enter. However, if you were to enter that, it would be pulled into the report here. There's also a summary box that is live in the Report Generator tab. So after you've completed your project, you can select this box and enter a summary, any details that you would like to include in your report here. All of your production data and your forecast data will be brought in for each well in the project, as well as all of your economic parameters and your cash flow tables. And scrolling all the way to the bottom, you'll see the same charts that we saw in the Build Out Model tab. One thing to note is that these tables are still expandable in the report generator. So if you want to expand here year 1 out and view the monthly net operating revenue and cash flow for year 1, you can do that prior to emailing a PDF to yourself. So once you're happy with your project and your report, you can select Email Me the PDF, and it will send an email to the email address associated with your Drillnomics account with a PDF of your project. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact our customer support team. Our contact information can be found on our website at www.drillnomics.com.